every now and then. This is the only one that is really more or less consistent. Certainly now that I'm not traveling, it can be more consistent than before. So what is this, week 7 or week 8 that we're sitting here? Not leaving the house. Wouldn't it be funny if it turns out that this social distancing was really not necessary at all? Then we would know for sure that this is God doing it. That it's God himself who wants us home. But the fact is we are. And there's got to be a meaning and a purpose and a benefit to this aloneness. So I was talking just recently about the intimacy subject of the latest book, Joy of Intimacy. And somebody said, there's a terrible problem with aloneness, but isn't that what this quarantine is going to do to us? We're going to feel terribly alone, and that's not a healthy way to be. But there really is a difference. There is alone and there's alone. You have a technical aloneness. You're locked in a room. So fact is, technically, you are alone in that room. It's not the same as feeling alone in the world. Feeling alone in the world is not isolated, because you can have people that you are very close to and you are not alone in the world, but you're very isolated in a room, in a house, on a boat, on an island. So there's a healthy aloneness and there's a technical aloneness. An unhealthy aloneness and a technical aloneness. The unhealthy one is nobody's got you locked in a room. There's just nobody for you to talk to. You're free to go, but you got nobody to go to. That's unhealthy. If you have people, you're not alone in the world, but you can't get to them because you're isolated. That's just a technicality. In fact, when people do find themselves isolated, for whatever reason, what keeps them going is the knowledge that there are people out there that I belong to, I belong with. So I am not alone. And that keeps you going during the isolation. Like today, many people saying, I miss my grandparents, I miss my children, I miss my friends. So you have someone that you would want to be with, you just can't get there. So in the counting of the Omer, we're going to start the week of Hod. The week of Hod has that great, meaningful day, Lag BaOmer, is in the week of Hod. What exactly is this attribute called Hod? I think we've spoken about this before, but it's the time that we're in. We got to talk about it. The emotions can be viewed as a body and a soul. A complete structure, a complete, any complete set has to have a body and a soul. The first 3 emotions, love, fear, compassion, or kindness, judgment, and compassion, That's the soul of the emotions. It's the breath of life that animates your feelings. Love is a very exciting and excitable emotion. So is fear and hate. They're hot, they're intense, they're hard to ignore. And compassion, not as intense, but certainly as consuming. When you're feeling compassion, when you're overwhelmed with compassion, it's your whole being, and it's very much alive. So all the excitement, all the energy, all the drama in our emotional life is in the first three attributes of the emotions, which is chesed, gvura, and tiferes. Kindness, judgment, and compassion. In fact, in literature and in art, that's pretty much what it's about. Every book, every drama, every opera, it's all about one of these three or a combination. That's why we can call it the soul of the emotions. Or some people would say soulful emotions. But to be real, it also has to have a body. Emotions need a body, need substance, stability, permanence. The body of the emotions is another set of three, and that is netzach, hod, and yesod. Netzach is translated as victory. It's kind of like a perseverance, a determined emotion. Determined kindness, determined discipline, determined compassion. It gives the emotion staying power. It gives it some stability. It embodies the soul of emotions. So chesed, for example, love without netzach is fickle. It's flighty. It's a little bit unpredictable. Emotion by its very nature is kind of unpredictable. But not to where you never know what the next minute is going to bring. So fickle, unstable, mood swings, that's a lack of netzach. The emotions don't have ballast. Netzach is translated as victory because it means that things that disturb your emotions will not overcome the application of that emotion. In other words, you're inspired with kindness. You studied something, you read something, it really moved you deeply to be kinder. But then time passes, you didn't have an opportunity to do anything kind, and the excitement fades. And then you're sitting there thinking, I was so excited. I really should do something kind. And then you think, well, I should have done it yesterday when I was excited. Now, Netzach kicks in and says, no, we're going to do it. Netzach gives the kindness a staying power, makes it happen. That's why it's called victory. It overcomes those things that deaden your excitement. So when you're inspired with kindness, we call it chesed. When you're determined in kindness, we call it netzach. Physiologically, kindness is represented by the right arm. Netzach is represented by the right leg. So the first day of creation was an expression of God's kindness. What did God do on the first day of creation? He said, let there be light. Light is kindness. The fourth day of creation is Netzach. What happened on the fourth day of creation? God put the sun, the moon, and the stars into their orbit. The moon, the sun, and the stars, that's all about light. So you see the similarity between the first day and the fourth day, between Chesed and Netzach. The difference is the light that God created on the first day was infinite. It was too much. And it could not stay in the world outside the Garden of Eden. So it had to be withdrawn, and it's been tucked away, well preserved. It is being saved for the days of Mashiach, when the lowest world will be able to contain the highest light. But what do we get from that? The intensity and the inspired kindness of the first day is unstable. It doesn't last. So the fourth day, God puts the sun and the moon and the stars into their orbits, not as intense. It's not an infinite light. On the other hand, it's more stable, more reliable, more predictable. That's Netzach. What gives Netzach this stability? What makes it more, yeah, it's a little too loud, I think. And the substance of Netzach actually comes from its humility. It's interesting, huh? Humility is stable. Inspiration is fickle. So what is the difference between inspired and humble? Inspired means I am moved. I am moved to kindness. I am moved to judgment. I am moved. There's a lot of me in it. And that makes it exciting, but not humble. A person who loves and that love is threatened, dangerous, because you're attacking me. The love is me. It's my excitement. It's my experience. It's the experience that I am having. Netzach, on the other hand, is more motivated by fact and reality than by my ego. You got to do what you got to do. Right is right. Yesterday, you knew and you felt that you should be kinder. Well, you should be. So now you don't feel it so much, but you still should be. So the humility is the ability to allow the facts to guide my behavior. I don't need my inspiration to make kindness appropriate, necessary, and good. It is good, objectively. will you allow that to influence your behavior? That takes a little humility. You got to move your ego aside and let something other than yourself dictate your behavior. So I think I mentioned this before, maybe more than once. One of our mashpiyim, one of our teachers in yeshiva, when we were quite young, he drew this picture for us. He says, obedience is really important. Why is it important? Because imagine you decide that your parents can't tell you what to do. You don't have to obey your parents. Then you come to school and you decide that you don't have to obey the teacher or the principal. Then you come to the higher classes and there's a mashpia. You decide you don't have to listen to a mashpia. Then there's a Rebbe. You're not in the mood of letting something or someone dictate your behavior, so even the Rebbe can't tell you what to do. He has to ask you politely. When the Rebbe would speak to people who came to visit or whatever for a private audience, the Rebbe would always suggest. The Rebbe would say, if you want my opinion, or may I suggest, it might be a good idea, right? But when he was talking to his chassidim, there was no such niceties. The Rebbe would either say yes or no, do or don't. Many years ago, we asked the Rebbe if we should make Beis Chana, the program we had in Minnesota for women, whether we should make it a full-time school. The Rebbe didn't suggest not to do it. The Rebbe said, you don't have the budget, you don't have the facility, you don't have the staff. What are you asking? Straight to the point. On another occasion, we asked whether we should locate the Chabad house on campus, Minnesota State, University of Minnesota campus. The Rebbe's answer was no. That's it. That was it. That was the whole answer. In fact, when the Rebbe was polite with a chassid, the chassid worried. The Rebbe doesn't think he can just talk to me straight. He has to be polite with me. Not good, right? So in the ability to admit that you're wrong because right is right, Netzach is, in a sense, the most valuable of all emotions. Letting the fact dictate. But if your parents can't tell you, and the teacher can't tell you, and the principal can't tell you, and the mashpia can't tell you, and the Rebbe can't tell you, next thing is you find that even if God would tell you, you wouldn't listen. It's like an unbroken horse that will not tolerate a blanket, much less a saddle. Right? That's not the end of the story. The mashpia told us the next step after that is that you cannot tell yourself what to do. You have become so intolerant of any kind of responsibility, um, demand, that even if you're demanding it from yourself, you can't stand it. So here's what happens. If you don't obey your parents, eventually you will not obey yourself. You will be out of control. Which tells us something really interesting. Obedience is not behavior. Obedience doesn't mean I do what you tell me. Obedience means the ability to let something outside of me dictate my behavior. It's much deeper than just behavior. You can fake behavior. In the army, you are disciplined, you are taught to obey. Sergeant says march, you march. Sergeant says stand at attention, you stand at attention. You can fake it. You're not obeying. You're going along. But you've got your own agenda. You're doing what you want to do, but you're playing in behavior. You're playing along with the sergeant. A good sergeant, an insightful, knowledgeable sergeant will be able to tell immediately, you're not obeying. You did what you had to do, but you have no obedience in your system. So obedience actually is a form of humility where it doesn't have to be me dictating. What's right or wrong, what should or shouldn't be, can be dictated by other things, by other people. Circumstances can dictate. Farmers are humble, generally speaking, because they've gotten comfortable with the idea that their fate lies outside of themselves. There will either be rain or there won't be. There'll be too much rain or too little rain, or there'll be infestations, or there'll be other problems with the crops, and then he's got nothing. So there's a humility that says, I will plow, I will plant, I will weed, I will water, I will do everything it takes. And I may not get what I want because it's really up to the weather. It's up to the rains. If the rains don't come, I'm finished. So most people would say, well, in that case, I'm not investing all that time and energy. I want to feel in control. If I know I'm not in control, then why should I invest in it? That's a lack of humility. The farmer is humble. It's okay. I'll do what I have to do. I'll put in all the effort. I'll put in all the work, day and night, and so on and so forth. And if it's not going to happen, out of my control. So in practical language, netzach means you got to do what you got to do. You can't wait for inspiration. And you can't quit when the inspiration fades. You probably know people who are the embodiment of these attributes. You know, somebody who is just an embodiment of kindness and generosity, just a walking kindness. That's all he is. Needs nothing for himself, just wants to give to others. All the time, no exceptions. That's what they are. They are kindness on feet, on two legs. Then there are people who are discipline on 2 feet. They are so measured in whatever they do, whatever they say, and whatever they think. It's got to be right. It's got to be proper. And so And that's what they are, full time, no exceptions. They're just walking gvura. I'm talking about the positive side of it. There's also a negative side. We're not going there. And then there are people who are just one giant compassion entity. They always look like they're about to cry with compassion. Life is so sad. Life is so painful, not for themselves, for others. And they hear a sad story or a person in trouble, they will not rest until they've done something. So they're just the embodiment of compassion. Then you have people who are the embodiment of Netzach. Gotta do what you gotta do. We call them the salt of the earth. When something has to happen, they're there, almost like with a homing instinct. Wherever something needs to happen, they show up and they get it done. Primarily, it is the follow-up and the embodiment of kindness. Now, on the left side, you have this coming week's theme, which is Hod. Hod is translated as glory. I'm not even sure what that means. But in Hebrew, Hod is related to the word modeh, acknowledgement. I acknowledge, modeh ani lefanecha, I acknowledge before you, living God, that you are trustworthy and kind to return my soul to me. That is also a form of perseverance. It's a follow-through, maybe more with the emphasis on judgment or on discipline, because the right leg supports kindness, which is the right arm. The left leg supports judgment, which is the left arm. So if you were determined, inspired, really excited about disciplining yourself or getting something perfectly right and adjusted, fine-tuned, and then the inspiration fades, are you going to do it or you're not going to do it? That depends on Hod. So Hod means the glory of seeing it through. Like a soldier coming back from war with his head held high. What is he proud of? That he killed people? We're not talking about that kind of soldier. What is he proud of? That he stayed till the end. He didn't quit. He saw it through to the end, whatever his mission was. That's Hod. But Hod is more humble than Netzach. See, Netzach will allow the circumstances and the facts to dictate his behavior. He will certainly let his teacher dictate his behavior. And we certainly let God dictate his behavior. That's humility. Got to do what you got to do. In Hod, there's one additional layer or dimension of humility. And that is where Netzach can admit that he was wrong and accept obligation. Hod can admit that you were right and that you have no obligation. So you have a person who got into a big argument with his neighbor. In the end, it turns out his neighbor was right. The Netzach guy is going to come across the street and say, I got to tell you, I was really fooled by that one. I thought, and I was so wrong. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was wrong. But he will not say, I guess you were right. He won't say that. Can't bring himself to say that. He doesn't have that degree of humility. To say you were right would hurt his ego. It doesn't hurt his ego to say I was wrong. We can find whatever explanations there are. I can say I was wrong because, hey, nobody's perfect. But you were right. No. That means you bested me. My ego won't swallow that. So Hod has that additional humility that I'm perfectly comfortable. It is totally painless to admit that you were right. How that expresses itself in practical application, the Netzach guy will say, our country is being attacked, we got to go protect it. I don't like it, but I got to go. You got to do what you got to do. But then he notices that you're not going. Or he's actually told, women don't go to war. Students of yeshiva are exempt from the army. They don't go to war. Oh, now all of a sudden, he's not so comfortable. Look, I'm willing to go because, I got to do what you got to do. But if you're not going, well, no, that's not right. I'm going to go and you're not going to go? You're more privileged than me? That I can't accept. So I'm going and you have to go too. Hod is the exact opposite. I got to go. You must not go. You stay home and be safe. You do what you need to do because you're more significant than me. So I'll go risk my life, but you can't. You are necessary, more necessary than me. So if my life is lost, it wouldn't be so terrible, but you have to be. You have to be safe, you have to live, you have to do what you do. Mother the children, study Torah, bring God into the world. You get up from the table and you clean some of the table. You take your plate, because you got to do what you got to do. Then you notice nobody else is cleaning up. So you don't do it either. That's Netzach without Hod. Hod means, no, you sit and enjoy. I'll to put the other person before yourself, not even beside yourself. So it's not, let's do this together. No. You be safe, sit comfortably, enjoy. I'll take care of what needs to happen. That is a combination of Netzach and Hod. Now, because Netzach and Hod are represented by the legs, the right leg and the left leg, that's why when we stand for the Amidah, for the Shemona Esrei, we have to stand with our legs together. The reason given, the explanation given is because you stand in front of God, you have to stand like an angel. And in the description of the angels, in the vision of Yecheskel, it says that the angels have two legs that appear as one, which means they're side by side. And even in nature, physiologically, the difference between the legs and the arms grow at opposite angles. This one grows off toward the right, and this one grows off towards the left, and they're separated by the shoulders. The legs are not like that unless been riding on a horse too long. The legs grow naturally side by side. They don't branch off. They branch down, but not off to the side, not to the right and not to the left. So although there is a right and a left, but they're right and left side by side, as if they were one. Now, according to what we're saying now, the reason your legs have to be together when you're saying the Amidah is because you're standing in front of God, you're submitting your will to Him, and that will involve both Netzach and Haid. You can't just come to God and say, I don't know anything, I'm wrong. You also have to say, you're right, what you want should happen, and I'll take care of it. I will serve you. So that's the humility of Haid. Haid means I recognize that you are ahead of me, you are more deserving than me, you are superior to me. That is certainly humble. So Netzach will obey the authorities, the need, the fact. But Hod will actually praise and acknowledge the superiority or the privilege of someone else. Then there's Yesod, which I guess we'll talk about next week. But Yesod is translated as foundation. There's the fundamental emotion. Now, what is a fundamental emotion? Why isn't it given a title like all the others? Calling it fundamental doesn't describe it. It's like saying, this emotion is very important. Well, which emotion is it? In emotions in general are not the same as sensations. Sensation comes from the senses, the five senses. You know, if you get a chill down your spine, that's not an emotion. That's a sensation. Emotion means a response and a reaction to someone. And that's why you can't really have emotions about a tree. You can have a sensation. Emotion has to involve another conscious being to whom you are reacting. In other words, interpersonal. What is the foundation of all interpersonal contact, relationship, interaction? Just the fact. We are partners. We are in this together. We are married to each other. We're related. We are family. We're fellow Jews. There's a certain fundamental fact that brings us together. It's not kindness, it's not judgment, it's not compassion. Those are just details. Fundamentally means where we belong with each other. How is that expressed? Well, in love and devotion and compassion, in discipline, disciplining yourself. So all of those other emotions are the expressions of the relationship, the form that the relationship takes, the spice. But relationship itself is not love, and it's not compassion. Relationship is simply a fact. We are related. We need each other. It's a fact. It's almost not a feeling at all. And yet it is the most fundamental emotion. The ability of two people to think of themselves as one. Not able to distinguish. So in Netzach, I know what I have to do. I know when I'm right, I know when I'm wrong. In Hod, I know who you are, and I know what you deserve, and I acknowledge your superiority. But we're still two different people. In Yesod, I don't think of us as two people. It's like two soldiers fighting to survive under heavy fire. They don't think of each other as another person. That's the bond between soldiers. We got to get out of here. Husband and wife, the famous analogy of if a guy rescues himself from the Titanic on a lifeboat and then realizes that he had forgotten his wife. No excuses will get him off the hook. You don't forget your wife. Because you're supposed to be thinking of your wife as yourself. There is no you without her. So who got onto that boat? If it wasn't with her, then this is not you. That's called Yesod. In application, Yesod might justify dying for the other person. Not only submitting your ego, humbling yourself, and serving the other person because of your own humility and insignificance. This goes to the fundamentals. If there's a choice between my existing and your existing, you have to exist. Even if I can't. So that is called the ultimate Mesiras Nefesh. Real Mesiras Nefesh, dying rather than violating God's command, that happens in Yesod. Now it comes from the essence of your soul, the devotion. The devotion to God comes from the essence of your soul, where there's nothing besides God. So it's not surprising that under no circumstances are you going to violate God's will, because there's nothing besides him. But where does this express itself? Every instinct of the soul, every emotion of the soul, every whim of the soul has to find expression in the body, in the lower parts of the soul, in the personality. So where does it show up? Where is this Mesiras Nefesh expressed into the physical? In the attribute of Yesod. There's an expression, Tzaddik Yesod Olam. The Tzaddik is the Yesod, the foundation of the world. The Tzaddik, who cannot compromise God's will, who would rather die, that is the Yesod of the world. Now there, obviously, the humility is complete. Total humility. Now, interestingly, what happens after that? When a person experiences the Netzach, which says, I'll do what I need to do, the Hod, which means I put you before myself. I will protect you at risk to myself. And then Yesod, which means you are absolutely necessary, I am not. It's not my opinion isn't necessary. I'm not necessary. Once you reach that degree of bittul, that degree of humility, now you can become an influencer. Now you can transport or transmit all the emotions that came before it to the next generation, to your children or to your student. So in order to be an effective teacher, you have to have this humility. When it's really not about you, then you become a great teacher and a great communicator. Great by Torah value. An inspired, charismatic, colorful, dramatic speaker would be considered an effective speaker. In Torah, an effective speaker means someone whose words have a permanent effect, not a momentary one. The flashy, dramatic, colorful speaker, he gets you excited and it lasts for about 2 hours. Because he doesn't have the humility. But when you've reached this level of humility, then you are truly a mashpia, a giver, because everything you say, everything you share is going to have a deep, permanent effect. Why? Because it's not about you. Because there's no ego in it. In the Torah, we're told that when you quote, when you're going to repeat something you heard from your teacher, it is a great virtue to attribute. Tell people whom you're quoting and where you got this information from. You see it in the Talmud all the time. Rabbi so-and-so says in the name of Rabbi so-and-so. So we're told that if you attribute, if you're honest, and you give attribution to your quotes, it hastens the coming of Mashiach. Pretty impressive. Cosmic effect. On the other hand, we find so many times in Torah where one sage quotes another sage and does not attribute. In the Haggadah, for example, we have Omar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, I never knew that you're supposed to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, the day you came out of Egypt, but the mitzvah to say it at night, I never knew until Ben Zoma revealed it. Attribution. But then so many times, even in Tanya, there's so many, you look at the footnotes at the Maramokim that tells you where that quote came from, but it's not in the text. So the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, he didn't put in the source material where it came from. You have to put it in as a footnote. So when do you have to attribute and when don't you? So technically, practically, if what you're quoting has not really been assimilated into your thinking. To you, it still sounds new. It sounds different. Then you have to attribute. Because you are, in fact, quoting that person. But if you studied something, you learned something from your teacher, and it just settled into your mind and heart, and this is the way you now think, you no longer have to attribute. Because now, this is your thinking. It didn't start with you, but now it is you. So you're not quoting anymore. When you're saying this, it doesn't feel like a quote. When it feels like a quote, then you should attribute. A teacher who is truly humble will not be quoted. Because when he teaches, the students get it so thoroughly that in a very short time, it becomes their way of thinking. So they're no longer quoting him. It's like the student has become the teacher. I mean, you talk to a Jew, and the Jew says, when God created the world, the first day he said, let there be light. Do you need to attribute? Do you need to say, the Bible says that on the first day God created light? Or more technically, Moses writes in the Torah that God told him that. You don't do that. And if you do it, something's wrong. Because when you attribute, you're saying, this is news to me. I only heard it from, I read it. Well, I don't really care where you read it. Why do you have to attribute? Because you're telling me, I would have never thought of this, but I saw it in the Talmud on page such and such. So the reason for the attribution is to be honest about the fact that it's news to you. But when it's not news to you anymore, it comes across so naturally, right? So when you have a teacher who has Netzach, Heid, and Yesod, then comes Malchus. Malchus means to teach, to transmit, to pass it on. You pass on everything that came before. Now the student will not even realize that he should be attributing to you. You don't hear people say, when I was in first grade, my teacher told me that 2 and 2 is 4. You don't do that. 2 and 2 is 4. This is how creation takes place in God's attributes. God first revealed the attribute of kindness, then Gvura, then, right? And then it came to God's attribute of Yesod, which is so humble that when it gets transmitted to the next world doesn't know where it came from. It has no attribution. So this physical world has no sense of its creator. It's even true of heaven and earth, which are both created. And yet earth attributes nothing to heaven. Because what it gets from heaven, it's completely unaware. Heaven doesn't ask for attribution. Heaven doesn't make you conscious of it. It just gives you what you need, and you think It's yours. That's the problem with this world. God is creating it as we speak, creating us as we speak. I have no idea. If you're smart enough, you can figure it out. But in terms of experience, you don't feel it. You don't feel like, wow, who's creating me right now? Don't feel it. And part of the reason you don't feel, of course, is because you're callous. The physical is insensitive. But that's not the only reason. You see that even the most insensitive can feel certain things. Even something like heat and cold. So why don't we feel God creating us? Because he does it so humbly that we're not even aware that we got what we got from someplace outside of ourselves. It just feels like it's always been there. So you ask somebody, how are you feeling? Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I've got good health. You don't have good health. At this moment, you are being given good health. Every second, you are given what is given. And if God forbid, what is given is illness, then you're ill. So if God is creating us, why aren't we aware? Why don't we have that sensation? Oops, I was just created. I just came into being. No, I am. It's so seamless. It's so gentle that you don't even feel it happening. But intelligently, we have to overcome that. We have to overcome that natural and undisturbed flow of life, so that we don't feel second to second that we need it to be recreated and we are being created at every second. It's like a movie moving at the right speed. You don't see the black strip between frames. You just see a smooth movement. But when you slow it down and you take a closer look, you realize, no, there are separate frames. Each frame exists independently of the other. There's a little black stripe between one frame and another. And now you are conscious of the movies, the moving images. But when it's smooth, uninterrupted, you don't even know there is a film. It looks like it's just one continuous flow. So, to be an effective teacher, you have to put your ego aside. When you're self-conscious in your teaching, you make the student intensely aware that you're the teacher and he's just the student. And so that's how he learns. He will quote you because nothing you said really settled into him. My teacher said this, my teacher said that. It can be annoying, you know. You ask somebody, what do you do on the night of Yom Tov? He says, well, Rabbi so-and-so said, and my teacher said, and this one says, and that one says. But don't you know anything yourself? From all that learning, what do you know? Why are you still quoting others? So when a teacher is self-conscious, he's going to hear himself quoted a lot by his students, which makes him feel very good. But the student has not become the teacher. One of the teachers that I had in yeshiva, anytime I asked him a question, he turned it around on me. He made me come up with the answer. He directed my thinking. So I would come up and say, why is this the way it is? What is the connection here? And he would say, how would two things be connected? And what would bring, and then I would realize, oh, okay, sorry. No further questions. So there's teacher and student, where for years and years they study together, and the teacher remains the teacher and the student remains the student, and forevermore the student is going to quote his teacher, which is nice. Not the best. The best is the teacher's thinking becomes the student's thinking. The teacher not only transmits information, he also transmits a way of thinking, a style of study, and the student picks it up. Nothing is said, it's unconscious, because the teacher is egoless. So what gets transferred from the teacher to the student is not only the information, but also the teacher's way of thinking. The way the teacher's mind works molds the way the student's mind works. So now the student can come up with the same insights and the same conclusions that the teacher did. The student has become the teacher in his gifts, in his doesn't necessarily inherit the position. So that's where we are. We're in the months of humility. Humility means the willingness to act on your inspiration, the ability to overcome loss of inspiration and do it anyway and be consistent. And in that, there are the three levels of humility, to where the two become one. And it's not one doing for the other in humble service. It's just a merged ego. And then the influence on the next generation is really powerful. You know, I'm describing the Rebbe. That's how one person can create an entire generation. Influence, mold an entire generation. Anyway, we've gone over time. It's been, personally, an enjoyable week. Still haven't gone out of the house. I'm liking it. I really am. I'm kind of surprising myself here. It's good. Won't go on forever. Won't be good forever. But in the meantime, I'm really getting to know myself. The self is a very big book. And anytime you think you finished the book, you haven't. You're just making it past the first few chapters. There's so much more. Good and bad. Good and not so good. So, as long as God wants us to be looking at ourselves and getting to know ourselves, we'll continue doing it. with the idea that once we do know ourselves sufficiently, we can have a much better, more effective, more enlightening, more lasting influence on the world around us. So thank you for listening. And I hope this is of some practical use that can kind of guide our behavior and our mitzvahs and get us ready for receiving the Torah once again on the day of Shavuot. Good night.